How would you describe your relationship with your body? Have you ever not participated in an activity because of how you felt your body looked? How do you feel about the word fat? I'll confess that for a large part of my life, how I looked or didn't look occupied a large part of my mind. Thoughts surrounding how my body looked stopped me from doing things I desperately wanted to do, took precious time and energy away from me, and limited my life in some ways. If, like me, you too find yourself preoccupied with thoughts surrounding how your body looks, you are definitely not alone. Contemporarily, there is a cultural expectation that not only we all be very invested in our bodies, but that we be very invested in becoming or remaining thin. About half of American adults report that they are worried about their weight, some or all of the time. 97 million Americans diet, and the diet industry was worth $75 billion in the United States last year. My name is Keelyn Taylor, and I stand before y'all from a place of personal and academic investment. I am a sociologist. Sociologists investigate social reality. How we think about our bodies and other people's bodies is indicative of the cultural values and systems of our society. Today, I'd like to talk about fatness and anti-fatness from a sociological perspective. According to Aubrey Gordon, anti-fatness is an umbrella term used to describe the attitudes, behaviors, and social systems that specifically marginalize, exclude, underserve, and oppress fat individuals. We live in a society that has prejudice and biases against those who are fat, resulting in systemic oppression. We have all, to some degree, internalized anti-fat messages and ideas because anti-fatness is pervasive. We see anti-fatness everywhere, in the news, in movies, in Facebook memes, from our family members. We know that fat is thought of negatively. But thinking of fat negatively is not only an issue of bullying or damaged self-esteem. Anti-fatness has material consequences. Weight-based discrimination has been found in employment, education, healthcare, and interpersonal interactions. For some concrete examples, seating in most spaces is designed with smaller or thin bodies in mind. Those who are fat may experience pain or discomfort when sitting in restaurant booths, airplane seats, or school desks. I encourage y'all to think about the very seats you are sitting in right now. Healthcare equipment like MRI scanners or exam tables often come with weight limits, leaving many who are fat afraid that their healthcare needs will go unaddressed or reluctant to go to the doctor in the first place. Fat individuals are paid less than their thin colleagues, and in 48 states, it is legal to fire or refuse to hire someone because they are fat. Only 2 states, Washington and Michigan, have banned size-based discrimination. These are just a few examples of the ways our society neglects or discriminates against those who are fat. But with the power of sociology, we can see that anti-fatness is not innate. It doesn't have to be this way. The meanings we assign to fat are created socially. Yes, differences in body size literally exist, but how we think about those differences varies. What it means to be fat differs medically, culturally, by time and place, and for differently positioned individuals. For example, let's think about the difference in what was considered fat during the height of the 90s fashion trend, heroin chic, compared to today. Practicing this time-based comparison is an exercise in what sociologists call the sociological imagination. Dr. C. Wright Mills' sociological imagination is a tool that helps us understand how our individual and personal lives are impacted by societal structures like ideas, laws, norms, or institutions. Using the sociological imagination forces us to not rely on stereotypes or assumptions. Instead, we must think critically. I think using the sociological imagination is like taking a journey. Like Homer's Odyssey, it can be challenging. It requires courage, and it may make us uncomfortable. Utilizing the sociological imagination would force us to interrogate ideas about fatness that we might be taking for granted. With this tool, we can look to sociological, anthropological, and historical evidence to better understand the different ways that fat has been thought about. So, let's start with time and place. For instance, in the 16th century, white Western aesthetics thought that plump and proportionate women were the most beautiful. While contemporarily there may be a pervasive expectation for slimness in many Western societies, this ideal is by no means universal. If we look across time, according to Dr. Abigail Sadji, by one estimate, more than 80% of human societies on record have preferred women who would be overweight or mildly obese by current medical standards. There are, of course, still some societies and cultures where the preference for fat is commonplace today. Consider rural Mauritania. Here, some young girls are fed with the intention of being fattened for marriage because fat women remain the beauty standard. Similarly, in Fiji in the 90s, larger bodies were associated with positive attributes like health. However, in the early 2000s, researchers found that Western mass media had a powerful impact on body ideals around the world. When researchers visited one region of Fiji in 1995, they found that broadcast television was not yet available. However, just 3 years after the introduction of television, 69% of girls in Fiji reported that they were now dieting to lose weight, and those whose families owned a television were 3 times more likely to have an eating attitude associated with an eating disorder. What these examples indicate is that ideas around body size have differed around the world and throughout time. What they also demonstrate is that intersectionality is needed to understand the sociology of fatness and anti-fatness, because body size is racialized, gendered, and intimately tied to class. Some scholars argue that anti-fatness has roots in colonialism and Protestantism. Historically, fatness went against the values of the white Protestant work ethic. With this logic, being thin demonstrates the ability to master the body. Body size can then be rationalized to indicate how disciplined one is. Dr. Sabrina String's work details the connections between settler colonialism and Protestantism that have influenced the anti-fatness we know in the United States today. White Protestants' obsession with self-discipline deemed those who could not control themselves morally inferior. This judgment was often most harshly directed at those who were not white and those who were not men. Body size was, and still is, a form of distinction, a way for people to differentiate themselves from one another. This historical context is further complicated when we know that many scholars argue that body size, to some degree, is out of an individual's control. Contrary to popular belief, losing weight is not simply a matter of willpower. Biological factors are at play. Studies suggest that those who intentionally try to lose weight are unlikely to maintain any weight loss that occurs, with some studies claiming a weight loss failure rate of 95%. Other studies claim a weight loss failure rate of 98%. And what about gender? In the United States, there is broadly a cultural understanding that women are expected to be small and thin, while more grace is given for men to be large. Nevertheless, all genders face anti-fatness. The pressure for men to be lean and muscular is constraining in ways like the pressure for women to be small and thin. These ideals create hierarchies where some individuals are seen as more worthy of social reward. For example, can you think of 5 fat actors? If you can, what roles or characters do they typically play? What about 5 fat actresses? If you are struggling, perhaps this illustrates my point. Fatness and anti-fatness also impact those who are not cisgendered men or women. According to Dr. Caleb Luna, their fatness positions them outside of manhood and womanhood as both and neither. For some non-binary individuals, this can be affirming. For other gender non-conforming folks, this could potentially cause distress. With the sociological imagination, we also know that body size is tied to class. Throughout history, this relationship has fluctuated. In many parts of the world, fatness was once associated with wealth, and in some places, still is. However, contemporarily, the poor are more likely to be fat, and the wealthy are much more likely to be thin. This is, of course, not without reason. there is an academic consensus that for most people today, being thin requires time and monetary investment. Let us consider that there are many reasons that the poor are often fatter at present in the United States, including but not limited to the additional stress that comes from being poor, the necessity of working long hours or multiple jobs, and the structural lack of access to nutritious food. At this point, some of you may have wondered, what about health? Throughout this talk, I have used the word fat rather than obesity, and that's because labeling fatness as obesity is a particular way to frame and think about fat. When we refer to fatness as obesity, we are medicalizing it. This deems fatness a disease and a medical problem that should be solved. This is rooted in an assumption that fatness is wrong or bad. But with the sociological imagination, we know that fatness has not always been thought of as wrong or bad. Instead, research shows that there is not a straightforward causal link between fat and bad health, nor is there one between thinness and good health. In other words, being fat does not automatically equal bad health, and being thin does not automatically equal good health. Health is much more complicated than one's body size. Nevertheless, individuals, regardless of their body size, shouldn't have to be healthy to be respected, cherished, and protected from discrimination. Sometimes, concerns about health are anti-fatness in disguise. Let's think back to the United States' $75 billion diet industry last year. Of course, we should all have the power to make whatever choices we want with our bodies. But how can we think differently about that statistic now that we have discussed fatness and anti-fatness from a sociological perspective? Who benefits from the desire and pressure for us to be thinner? Who is harmed? How much of our dieting is for health, and how much is from a fear of fat? What if, instead of perpetuating anti-fatness, we could all flourish in the bodies we presently have, regardless of our body size, race, gender, class, or health? Imagine if we all worked to disrupt patterns of discrimination that led to the oppression of fat individuals. How would our society be more just and equitable if we didn't think of fat as inherently negative? Let's take our hero's journey. I challenge us to disrupt anti-fat thoughts about our bodies and other people's bodies. I challenge us to use the sociological imagination to think critically about anti-fatness. The journey to undoing anti-fatness in ourselves and in our society will likely not be an easy one. But I believe, I know, there is so much to gain if we lose the weight of anti-fatness. Thank you.